Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to support the channel and stay updated on more historical stories. The Trial of Nazi War Criminals. Justice after Catastrophe. When the Second World War ended in Europe in May 1945, the continent lay in ruins. Cities were shattered, millions were displaced, and the scale of human loss was almost beyond comprehension. As Allied soldiers liberated occupied territories and concentration camps, they encountered evidence of crimes so vast and systematic that the existing language of law and morality seemed insufficient to describe them. The question facing the victorious powers was unprecedented. How should those responsible for these crimes be judged? The answer would shape not only the post-war world, but the future of international justice itself. Out of this moral and legal crisis emerged the trials of Nazi war criminals, most famously conducted in the German city of Nuremberg. These proceedings were not simply acts of punishment or revenge. They represented a radical attempt to establish accountability at the highest levels of power, to affirm that even heads of state and military leaders were subject to law, and to document the truth of crimes that many feared might otherwise be denied or forgotten. The need for justice. After the war, the Allies had faced the problem of war crimes before. After the First World War, the Treaty of Versailles called for the prosecution of German leaders, including Kaiser Wilhelm II. Yet those efforts largely failed. Trials were limited, punishments were light, and many perpetrators escaped accountability altogether. By 1945, there was a widespread belief among Allied leaders that this time must be different. The crimes uncovered during and after the war demanded a response on a scale never previously attempted. Millions of Jews had been murdered in a state-organized genocide. Political opponents, Roma, disabled people, prisoners of war, and civilians across occupied Europe had been subjected to forced labor, torture, starvation, and execution. Entire regions were destroyed in reprisal operations. These were not isolated atrocities committed by rogue individuals. They were the result of deliberate policy, planned and executed by the Nazi leadership. At the same time, there was disagreement over how justice should be carried out. Some voices, including those within the Allied governments, argued for summary executions of top Nazi leaders. Others insisted that only formal trials could provide moral legitimacy and historical clarity. Ultimately, the idea of a public trial prevailed, driven by the belief that crimes of such magnitude must be confronted openly and judged according to law. Creating a new legal framework. One of the greatest challenges facing the Allies was the absence of an existing legal structure capable of addressing crimes on this scale. Traditional international law focused primarily on conflicts between states, not on the treatment of civilians by their own governments, or on systematic mass murder. In August 1945, the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and France signed the London Agreement, which established the International Military Tribunal, IMT. The tribunal was granted jurisdiction over three main categories of crimes. 1. Crimes against peace, planning, initiating, or waging a war of aggression. 2. War crimes, violations of the laws and customs of war, including the mistreatment of prisoners of war and civilians. 3. Crimes against humanity, murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation, and other inhumane acts committed against civilian populations. The inclusion of crimes against humanity was revolutionary. It recognized, for the first time in international law, that individuals could be held criminally responsible for atrocities committed against their own citizens. Choosing Nuremberg. The city of Nuremberg was chosen as the site of the tribunal for both practical and symbolic reasons. Its palace of justice had survived the war with minimal damage and included a prison complex suitable for holding defendants. More importantly, Nuremberg had been a powerful symbol of the Nazi regime. It was the site of massive party rallies and the infamous Nuremberg Laws, which stripped Jews of citizenship and legal rights. Holding the trials there transformed the city from a stage of propaganda into a courtroom of accountability. The same halls that once echoed with declarations of racial supremacy would now hear evidence of mass murder and aggressive war. The defendants, 24 major Nazi leaders, were initially indicted, representing the political, military, economic, and ideological leadership of the Third Reich. Among them were figures whose names had become synonymous with Nazi power: Hermann Göring, Reichsmarshal and Hitler's designated successor; Rudolf Hess, Hitler's former deputy, who had flown to Britain in 1941 on a bizarre solo peace mission; Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments and a key figure in the German war economy; high-ranking military officers, diplomats, and party officials who had helped plan and execute Nazi policies. Some of the most notorious figures, including Adolf Hitler, Heinrich Himmler, and Joseph Goebbels, had already committed suicide, depriving the tribunal of the opportunity to try them. Nevertheless, the defendants who remained represented the core of the regime. The trial begins. The trial officially opened on November 20th, 1945. From the outset, it was clear that this would not be an ordinary legal proceeding. 4 chief prosecutors, one from each Allied power, presented the case against the defendants. The courtroom was equipped with advanced technology, including simultaneous translation in 4 languages, allowing the proceedings to be conducted efficiently despite linguistic barriers. The prosecution's strategy was to rely heavily on documentary evidence produced by the Nazi state itself. Millions of pages of captured documents, film footage, photographs, and official orders were introduced into evidence. This approach was deliberate. By allowing the regime to condemn itself using its own records, the tribunal aimed to eliminate any claim that the charges were exaggerated or fabricated. Revealing the crimes. As the trial progressed, the world heard, often for the first time in such detail, the full scope of Nazi crimes. Films shot by Allied troops during the liberation of concentration camps were shown in court, depicting emaciated survivors, mass graves, and crematoria. Testimony from witnesses described forced labor, medical experiments, and systematic executions. The concept of genocide, though not yet fully defined in law, was clearly present in the evidence. The prosecution demonstrated how policies of persecution evolved into organized mass murder, carried out with bureaucratic efficiency. Trains were scheduled, camps were constructed, and entire populations were targeted for destruction. The defendants responded in different ways. Some denied all responsibility, claiming ignorance of the crimes or portraying themselves as mere administrators following orders. Others admitted limited involvement while attempting to minimize their role. A few, most notably Albert Speer, acknowledged moral responsibility, a stance that distinguished them from most of their co-defendants. Just following orders. One of the central legal questions of the trial was whether obedience to orders could excuse criminal behavior. The defense argued that the defendants had acted under compulsion, bound by loyalty and discipline in a totalitarian state. To punish them, they claimed, would be unjust and politically motivated. The tribunal rejected this argument. While it acknowledged that coercion could be considered in sentencing, it affirmed that individual moral choice remained possible, even within a dictatorship. This principle, that following orders is not an absolute defense, became one of the most enduring legacies of the Nuremberg Trials. Verdicts and sentences. On October 1, 1946, after nearly a year of proceedings, the tribunal delivered its verdicts. Of the 22 defendants tried, 12 were sentenced to death by hanging. 3 received life imprisonment. 4 were given long prison sentences. 3 were acquitted. Hermann Göring was sentenced to death but committed suicide in his cell the night before his execution. Others were executed shortly thereafter, their bodies cremated and the ashes scattered to prevent the creation of graves that could become sites of martyrdom. The verdicts sent a clear message. The leaders of a state could be held personally responsible for crimes committed in its name. Subsequent trials. The main Nuremberg trial was only the beginning. Between 1946 and 1949, a series of additional trials were conducted by American military tribunals in the same city. These proceedings targeted doctors who conducted medical experiments, judges who enforced racial laws, industrialists who exploited forced labor, and military commanders responsible for atrocities. Similar trials took place elsewhere in Europe and Asia, including the International Military Tribunal for the Far East in Tokyo. Together, these proceedings created a broad record of accountability, though many perpetrators still escaped justice. Criticism and controversy. Despite their historical significance, the Nuremberg trials were not without critics. Some argued that they represented victors' justice, pointing out that only Axis crimes were prosecuted, while Allied actions such as strategic bombing were not examined. Others questioned the retroactive application of laws, particularly the charge of crimes against peace. These criticisms continue to be debated by historians and legal scholars. Yet even critics often acknowledge that, given the unprecedented nature of the crimes, some legal innovation was unavoidable. Without Nuremberg, there might have been no meaningful attempt to hold perpetrators accountable at all. A lasting legacy. The impact of the trials extended far beyond the immediate punishment of Nazi leaders. They laid the foundation for modern international criminal law, influencing the creation of later institutions such as international criminal tribunals and the International Criminal Court. Concepts first articulated at Nuremberg, crimes against humanity, individual responsibility, and the rejection of absolute state sovereignty, became cornerstones of global justice. Equally important was the historical record created by the trials. Through meticulous documentation and public proceedings, the tribunal preserved evidence that would later become essential in combating denial and distortion of history. The trials ensured that the crimes of the Nazi regime were not only condemned, but proven beyond reasonable doubt. Moral and historical significance. The trials of Nazi war criminals were not perfect. They could not restore the lives lost or fully satisfy the demands of justice after such immense suffering. Yet they represented a profound moral statement that there are crimes so grave they offend all of humanity, and that those who commit them cannot hide behind power, ideology, or obedience. In the shadow of the destruction left by the Second World War, the Nuremberg trials affirmed a fragile but vital principle: that law can rise above violence, and that even after the darkest chapters of history, societies can choose accountability over vengeance. The legacy of these trials continues to shape how the world understands justice, responsibility, and memory. They stand as a reminder that while evil can be organized and systematic, so too can the pursuit of truth and accountability.